Really appreciate your feedback. This helps us to shape future events. Thank you. So we're really pleased to deliver today's vitally important session on cybersecurity, which we've brought to you as a result of the valuable feedback you have provided to us to help shape these sessions and meet your needs. We're all too aware of the havoc and disruption cyber attack can cause to schools and to pupils' education. So today's agenda. First of all, we're going to start with a 40-minute presentation, including time for question and answers, to help your academy understand and manage the risks of cyber attack and how cybersecurity standards can help. That will be followed by a 15-minute sector update from senior colleagues, including time for questions and answers. Then we'll have a short feedback survey, really important to gather your valuable feedback, and then finally a look at what's coming next. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over now to John. John, are you ready to go?
Yes, please. If you go to the next slide first. Hello, everyone. This is the first time I've spoken to a group of finance professionals rather than the IT-focused professionals that I normally speak to. The way I would normally approach explaining about cybersecurity is to kind of start from the nuts and bolts, the security principles, and kind of build up to there, and then the effects would be last. But with yourself as the holders of the accounts, what I thought I'd do is do it the other way around today by focusing upfront about the damage, the financial damage and the other damage. Some of you might know Carmel College, a college near St Helens. This college was successfully cyber attacked just before the beginning of the exam period. It had no mitigations. It had to essentially rebuild everything almost from scratch, with a lot of cooperation and a lot of help, including from the examinations boards. They managed to keep the show on the road but it was unbelievably damaging and stressful. That may serve as a decent exemplar of the kind of things which can happen. And they're not the only establishment in this position. Next picture, please. It doesn't just happen to schools. It happens to what some people sometimes think are more IT aware, more IT mature establishments. Next picture, please. One attack can have widespread results over a local authority or a trust area, and the damage can be quite widespread. As well as the more obvious damages of huge six-figure sums to repair the damage, the actual dynamics of the incident can be quite unsettling, because you may not realize just how much you're relying on your school email and account access. In a very successful attack, all that goes. Next slide, please. Okay, so what are the financial costs? So a cyber attack which doesn't work, or at least which is only partially successful, by which I mean that an attacker gets into the system, but the mitigations in the system, or sheer dumb luck in some cases, prevents the worst damage from happening. The costs there are kind of in the low 5 figures range. The reason for that, essentially, is cyber specialist companies start at about £15,000 to help you out. However, if it gets worse than this, then the cost can escalate extremely rapidly. The amount of damage that can be done in terms of time and content is almost limitless, and the eye-watering figures sometimes match that. Now, there's a lot of cyber criminals in the world, but generally speaking, then the ones who attack the education sector are financially motivated criminals. The ones who do serious attacks on the education sector. There's a lot more attacks on the education sector, which are essentially done by students. However, typically, they're more annoying than damaging. The people who put ransomware into schools or other devastating malware, they're criminals. They're very rarely based in the United Kingdom because of the way the judicial system works in terms of cyber attacks. As long as you carry out the attack from a country where there's no easy extradition treaty, it means it's extremely hard for you to be extradited. That means, generally speaking, cyber criminals attack countries other than their own. Next slide, please. Okay, since we're here to talk dollars, then what determines the cost of the attack? Essentially, the cost of the attack is linear after the first couple of variables, because it all depends on time. I know that generally speaking, the cost of a school are directly related to staff costs. So you'll all be on familiar territory when I tell you that repairing the damage from a cyber attack follows much the same principles. The more damage it's done, the more time it takes to repair, and that has a linear effect on costs after that first £30,000. Funnily enough, in comparison, the kind of headline items, the actual kit involved or the applications, even the data in a school setting, this is normally true, isn't actually that expensive relative to the time it takes. Next slide, please. Okay, so breaking that down, how are these costs incurred? So I mentioned essentially it's in the extra workforce hours. One of my jobs is speaking to schools which are either undergoing attack or have recently been attacked. And they make it clear that it's basically the cost of additional help or the costs of the existing resources being given over time, or opportunity costs for senior leadership team whose attention will almost be entirely grabbed by this attack. Now, this is relatively indifferent to the skill and knowledge level of those IT staff, because no school and no trust employs so much spare IT capacity that they can deal easily with a successful cyber attack. There's just it just doesn't happen like that. Even in a big trust, it wouldn't happen. So therefore, in any kind of successful attack, then you're going to be getting in extra help, and that extra help is expensive. A competent cybersecurity professional should be earning well over £50,000 a year. In some cases, a lot more than that. These people don't come cheap. You are also unlikely, even if your IT staff is good, to have the forensic skills to be able to carry out what they do, because IT networking skills and cybersecurity investigation skills are only partially overlapping. There's a lot of specialized stuff and a lot of specialized equipment in what cyber incident response companies do. And unless it's your lucky day, they're not really an optional extra. The reason for that is, after a successful attack, you're not likely to know which bit of the system was compromised. It's often not obvious. So merely rebuilding the system is not likely to protect you from the future in the future, and you don't really have much of a choice about that. Now, there are some additional costs apart from those big red letter ones. Sometimes replacing broken or old equipment. This tends to be servers or old printers, potentially, if those were the vectors of attack. Quite a lot of damage can be done to servers and servers which hold a large amounts of data, but generally speaking, they're in the low 5 figures. Now, depending on how successful the attack was and what was compromised, then there may also be either fines from the ICO or legal costs from the challenger parents. Haven't seen it too much in this country, although some companies, legal companies, have advertised on this basis. But it is more common in the United States, so it is potentially a growing industry. What's kind of more to the point, however, is the insurance premium and the ransom. Now, funnily enough, these are quite closely linked because the cyber attackers know that schools take out insurance against these kind of attacks. So often their ransom demand is closely related to what they think the insurance payout will be, or would be if you claimed it. Now, they might not always be right about that, but they do take cognizance of it when they're asking for that ransom. Or there's the cost of paying the ransom itself. Now, it's not strictly speaking in every circumstance illegal. I think I'm right in saying, because it's a bit of a legal grey area. However, for all the people in this audience, then they are directed by the Academy's handbook that they have to ask the ESFA, who would say no. And if you ask the DFE, then they would say no. But certain insurance companies might do it if the cost was low enough. I've never encountered one of those cases, though, mainly because they're criminals and they hold the whip hand. So there's no guarantee that even if you were to pay it, then they would decrypt all the data that they'd encrypted or stolen. So, having said that time's the major determinant, what are the factors which change the length of time that's involved? Normally in schools, it's actually the stealing of the data and the stopping of the systems that makes the difference, rather than that expensive kit has stopped working. This is different in different fields. So in the NHS, where one machine might cost £1 million, then the actual loss of the machine can be the important part. But generally speaking, in schools, it's not the case. It's the data, the loss of that data, and then the time taken to rebuild that and the system, which makes the mistakes. So if we can stop data being exfiltrated, or if that happens, that there's an undamaged backup, that makes a massive difference to how well the school responds to it. I would say if there's one factor which reduces the top level cost, it's that it's having an unencrypted backup. Now, the attackers are well aware of this. So their standard model of attack is to try and make sure they encrypt the backup at the same time as they encrypt the data that the school holds. However, there's ways to avoid this, and if you can take these measures, it's the near guarantee that will really limit the damage that's caused. Next slide, please. So, what are the measures that are most often successful? It's limiting the access that legitimate users have. Now, in the school environment, because some of my friends are IT staff in schools, this is the ones that cause problems on a day-to-day basis, because people want to be able to use a printer in every part of the trust. The heads want to be able to access all parts of the network at a touch of a button. And so do the IT staff. But that means that a successful attacker will also be able to access all those things. So we encourage a lot of network segmentation by having essentially the finance data, the management data, the teaching and learning data in different logical areas within the school's network to make it harder for the attacker. Unfortunately, quite a lot of attacks succeed because of either negligence or ignorance in terms of configuring security options which already exist that the school or the trust has bought but just weren't switched on. I've already mentioned about the offline backups. They're so important. One crucial thing which a lot of schools struggle with is that if you are attacked, then the quicker you bring in expert help, then the better your life will be, because it's more likely that they'll be able to put a stop to the attack if the attack is ongoing a lot quicker than your own IT staff will. There's been some schools and who've shared this experience with us afterwards, that because they found the whole ecosystem of cyber response and cybersecurity so confusing, they were so scared of being ripped off that they kept on delaying and delaying until they found outside help. But in the meantime, the attackers were causing extra damage. Related to that is having a response plan. Now, schools with response plans, so business continuity plans and disaster recovery plans, with cyber incorporated into this, tend to not believe that other schools don't. But the survey figures we've seen from the Department of Culture and Media indicate that actually only about half of schools have them. It does vary a bit depending on whether they're trust or whether they're secondary or primary, but actually the take up is low. And the problem with this is that because it's a pressured and confusing situation, then the chances of something going wrong are quite high. But more importantly, people's day is a lot worse than it needs to be, because they haven't sorted out, if we lose our emails, what will we do? If we lose the school phones, if we can't have access to our computers, what will we do? So, for instance, it's quite a difficult decision for a head about whether to close a school or not, and people play it different ways. This is often to do with whether they feel comfortable without having access to safeguarding data or SEN data, or if their school's quite IT developed, whether they can switch the heating on, that kind of thing. And they have to make that decision on the fly, whereas a lot of the variables in that decision could be decided beforehand. Okay, next slide, please. Against most of these types of attack, there are specific defenses, some of them technical, some of them personal. The big ones we find in schools when we're talking to them after attacks are old equipment, which wasn't patched or couldn't be patched, or weak passwords. Schools are getting better at this, but traditionally they've had very breakable passwords, which attackers have indeed broken. Schools are also quite resistant to multi-factor authentication because they associate that with, as everyone else associates with buying stuff from Amazon or similar, and then getting a little code to input on your phone. But a lot of schools really hate the idea of teachers sort of beeping with their phones in the middle of school time. There are other methods which can be implemented which achieve much the same effect, but it's fair to say that take-up has been very patchy of this, despite the fact that companies like Amazon do it for a reason, and so does your bank, because it's really, really effective. The one in red, this is perhaps the left-hand side, you can consider it as 50% of the problem, and the bit in red is the other 50%. It's from account details being compromised by successful phishing emails. Because schools have a lot of staff, emails are done at scale, and the attacker only has to be lucky once, whereas the school has to be right 100% of the time. So eventually, then the odds favour the attacker, especially if the staff are really kind of not particularly computer literate or aware of how these scams work. Next slide, please. I'll just let that slide sit for a moment, because I think it sums up the situation rather well. Just on the bottom right of that slide where it says it requires coordinated action from all, that's a key point, because in lots of educational settings, quite a lot of pressure gets put on the IT team to be able to solve all of these problems, but they're not necessarily given the power or resource support to enable them to achieve that. Now, I'm sure that their resource requests, like any other request in school, have to be closely monitored, but often the dynamics in the school where teaching and learning and student welfare come first can mean that IT security comes nowhere. That's not an entirely viable model if you don't want to be attacked. Next slide, please. So, DFE and in its omniscience and omnipotence would like to help sort out this situation. It's worth noting that for myself and my colleagues, unlike almost all other aspects of the DFE, where trusts and schools and LAs really value their independence, we're constantly getting asked, when will the DFE essentially intervene more? I'd be interested in any comments in the chat to the contrary, but it's basically one-way traffic. Trusts and schools say that this is a really difficult issue, which we don't necessarily have the resources to feel confident about countering it ourselves. We'd really like more support. And on face-to-face meetings, you know, at BET, for instance, or Schools and Academy Show, that's almost a constant message. We need more. The DFE is constrained about what it can do, given the strategic currents about everything else, but that's a fairly constant message. Anyway, cyber standards is one string in that particular bow. So next slide, please. This is the rough aim. In a series of standards, the numbers still being finalised, but it'll probably be 10 or 11. We've collected together the most important elements of resisting cyber attack or mitigating it if it does happen. One thing we found from extensive user research is that almost quite literally, the leadership and the IT team of a school don't necessarily speak the same language. They don't understand each other's concepts and concerns. So we're trying to create standards which speak to both parties, even though we're certainly not expecting both parties to do the same thing, or even from on high impose certain relationships. Where we're absolutely not doing that, but we are trying to create that kind of common framework so that heads, chief finance officers, deputy heads, principals can talk with some degree of assistance in a known framework with their IT staff, or even more difficult from the schools or trust point of view, with their outside IT providers, who often they don't feel necessarily very empowered to deal with, or they find their responses confusing. Taken as a whole, these areas that we've chosen to concentrate on first, they provide a kind of meta cybersecurity list of areas to look at. If a school or trust is looking at these areas and doing something about them, then they're very much on the right lines. Next slide, please. So what we've aimed to do is write in clear and education-focused language. Now, we are not, well, we are experts in cybersecurity, but we're not going to lay down the national or global policy. There's other people who do that. And to be honest, the techniques of cybersecurity are relatively well understood and relatively common between all sectors and up to a point, all nations. However, what we have found from our user research is that it's not necessarily couched in the language of schools and education in a way that can be understood. So we've tried to address that specifically. We've also tried to address the areas where schools and colleges find most difficult, or because we know from the attack data, the areas where the vulnerabilities are actually causing real world effects. These are the specific weaknesses which actual cybercriminals have employed to break into schools. We focused on low cost solutions. We know that it's a very challenging financial environment at the moment, but even if it weren't, then the financial environment in schools would always be challenging for IT security, and rightly so. They don't exist to provide IT security, and they don't have the kind of secrets where massive investment in IT security would be the right thing to do. But what we need to do, therefore, is concentrate on the low cost, big return wins, and luckily there are quite a few. Now, we've tried to take the best national practice as described to us by other parts of government, but we've tried to make it work with the art of the possible, or specifically what schools tell us is possible in their settings and not. Now, that pragmatism has to be also tempered on our side with the idea that schools have to do something. I get into quite a lot of conversations with schools which go something like this. Okay, could you use MFA? No, it's too hard. We don't really know what to do it, and we certainly don't want. To. There's a lot of opposition from the staff. Okay, why don't you use virtual networks and really segment your network so no attacker can do that much damage? Oh no, we're not confident about doing that. We tried a bit in the past, and we found it caused some problems which of access which we didn't like, and it's really taxing our IT staff, who we only have one permanent staff member on site, and we need him or her to basically be resetting passwords and fixing computers the whole time. Okay then, why don't you employ a company to do it for you? No, way too expensive. And all that's fine, but you have to pick something, because if you don't pick anything, then you're just as vulnerable as at the start of the conversation. I hope that kind of makes sense and kind of draws a picture of how the conversation can sometimes go. Sorry, you could go back one slide. I just want to hit that bottom point. I think it's important. This is the one about compatibility. So at the moment, schools are on the hook for certain elements to do with cybersecurity as a result of their responsibilities for keeping children safe. That puts the onus on schools about a certain amount of data protection. So if that data is held on a computer, then on a computer network, then they're already on the hook to carry out certain cybersecurity measures, whether they know it or not. We've designed the standards to certainly not contradict that, but to build on and expand that. A lot of schools and colleges, by no means all, will have had some experience, possibly positive, possibly negative, of the government Cyber Essentials schemes. This is supposed to be baseline cybersecurity accreditation. Now, schools have often found this challenging, either because of multi-factor authentication or because of having old devices, essentially, and Cyber Essentials does not like old devices. We've tried as best we can to design these standards so they're not exactly the same as Cyber Essentials, but they are based on Cyber Essentials to build on the stuff which schools could and should do, and also nudge them towards where they need to be in future. And lastly, one of the bright spots of this year, as far as we're concerned, is the RPA extending their coverage to cybersecurity. They did it for local authority and independently based schools in beginning of April, I believe, and at the beginning of this month, threw it open to academies. It wasn't because they prefer one or the other. It was just about volume. They couldn't deal with all of it in one go, I'm told. But we found that they after extensive discussion, they really pared down their basic requirements to just 4 areas, training and backups being key amongst them. And it seems to have been very successful, very well received, but also very useful for schools in that it's things that they can achieve and do, relatively speaking, easily. Our work is explicitly designed to build on that, but also to guide schools which don't yet meet those measures, so that if you achieve these, you would achieve that if you wanted it to. Next slide, please. So I won't labour format. It's in normal government, normal gov.uk type format. It's easy to read, even if it's not the most exciting thing. The only thing that I really need to bring to attention here is that a lot of standards are set in the format that it should go to senior leadership first, to then go to IT provider, whether that's a staff member or an outside company, and they're deliberately designed that like that, because that's how the relationship for most of these should work. Not for all of them. There's some things on reporting, for instance, where the spotlight is more on the leadership team and it goes the other way around. But we've thought about it and done it for a reason, to try and kind of help show where the natural relationship between it flows. So the standards are not just for IT staff, or they're not just for heads or whatever. They're for both parties. Next slide. So, as I mentioned, we've done 10. There might be a couple more coming in the future. There's a couple of like kind of contested areas. We've done standards which apply to a lot of cloud elements, but we haven't done a specific. Sorry, we have done a specific cloud security standard, but it's not clear that we'll release it at this point, because we think the field is still maturing. There may be other areas that we choose to go on into the future. We'd like to do more in the area of accreditation and securing of like IT suppliers. That brings its challenges. It brings its real challenges, because it perhaps doesn't go with the grain of how a lot of the rest of the education sector is working. But we receive a lot of requests saying that we would like to buy stuff, but we don't know who to buy from, and we just can't tell from the advertising blurb if this product fits what we need or not. So that's one possible area for development. We want to make reporting easier and getting help after an attack easier. We want to have more education-focused artifacts out there, because there's a lot of cybersecurity advice, but not much specifically for schools, and we'd quite like to change that. Okay, next slide. I think that goes through it all. I just want to mention that it's an iterative process, so we won't be afraid to change this in the light of experience, or more likely the technological developments. If I could just also draw your attention to the bottom, the general ambience of the education ecosystem in the UK at the moment is going for bigger trusts. That has one interesting consequence in terms of cybersecurity. Bigger trusts means bigger networks normally, and bigger networks means bigger attack area. At the moment, bigger attack area is a greater vulnerability than almost anything else. That's why schools and trusts actually get hit more often than, say, small primaries in local authorities, even though the small primaries cybersecurity measures are worse. So we really need to up our game as we're creating these bigger networks, because criminals find them harder to find. Bigger networks much easier to find. Sorry, excuse me. Next slide, please. Okay, any more questions for the channel? This is a screenshot, incidentally, from the dark web that I took last month. This is of an actual school who got compromised, and the criminals, what they do is they send essentially a ransom note to the school, and then they after a little while they post it up on their website with a kind of ticking clock about when they're either going to release it to the public or destroy it forever, depending on what they think will have most effect. Thanks very much for your time.
Thanks, John. That was really helpful and informative. Thank you. And quite a number of questions in the chat. I know you wouldn't be able to see them whilst you were presenting, so I'm just going to run through the questions now. With regard to MFA, how does this stand for teachers using their phones in classrooms and safeguarding?
Okay, so there's nothing which in the safeguarding regulations which stops a teacher having a phone in class. Now, I know that some settings use that, you know, that they use that as a measure, but there's nothing written in the measures to say that schools have to do this. That's a particular measure that they take. Now, it's not my place to object to that. I don't. All I will say is that's okay, but if you're going to do that, then you have to find some other way to do your cybersecurity. There's some schools, by contrast, which have phones in classes as a part of their safeguarding or a part of their teaching methodology, so they don't have the same issues.
Lovely, thanks, John. Next question, can you recommend a cyber response plan template to adapt at local level, please?
Not right now, but the standards will do contain templates, not just for that, but for all the other useful templates that you might need.
That's lovely, thanks, John. Is achieving the Cyber Essential Plus accreditation a sufficient proportionate level to aim for with regard to MFA? Yeah, I think that's the one question, sorry.
With regard to MFA?
Sorry, is
sorry.
achieving Cyber Essential Plus accreditation a sufficient proportionate level to aim for?
Yeah, it's a very good standard to aim for. And to be frank, if more schools reach Cyber Essentials, I would be delighted. Never mind Cyber Essentials Plus. Getting Cyber Essentials Plus is a really great achievement for your setting. If you can do that.
Brilliant, great, thanks, John. Just looking at someone's implemented MFA at 2 large colleges now. If done correctly, it's not nearly as much trouble or impact as you'd expect. You're only prompted from a new device, so once you've done the process, you're unlikely to get prompted for a long time, so you may never even need to respond to MFA prompt in the classroom. Don't know if there's anything you want to comment or add to that, John?
I will add one thing. There is resistance. There is, like, as a whole, education isn't necessarily composed of the most IT savvy cohort. There are some very IT aware people, both on the kind of security side and networks side, teaching side, all those things. But as a whole, as an entire demographic, they're not necessarily the kind of the most comfortable with it. But it's like a lot of things. It's more disorientating initially, perhaps a little bit, but there's nothing really to be frightened of. Everyone in the actual IT world is going with MFA. You have to.
Super. Okay. Comment here, you could use alternatives such as YubiKeys, yubico.com, if you don't want to have teachers using phones in the classroom, or the configure rules to remove the need to 2FA from within your network.
Yeah, 100%. And the standards includes examples and pointers to alternatives if you're really set against phones in classroom.
Well, thank you. Moving on, can you advise on the offline backup related to the 3-2-1 rules, please?
Yes, I can, because I get lots of queries about this, because the RPA in their first line pass on their queries to me to answer this. The reason is because their guidance comes from the National Cybersecurity Centre, and to be honest, their guidance is not the easiest thing in the world to pass. So, 3-2-1 rule. The 3 copies, okay, means what it says. 3 independent copies. Now, you can have 3 copies on one device just by doing it on different days. The point is that they're entirely separate and not dependent on each other. That's the 3 backups. Okay. The 2 is 2 different places. So one could be on a local server in your school, and one's in the cloud, or one could be in your local school and one could be in a school down the road. If you really wanted to be entirely hardcore about it, then you could achieve it by having 1 backup in your school and 1 backup in your sock drawer. It's a different place. That's all the 2 means. Okay. And then the offline one, means that both backups can't be plugged in at the same time. So if someone compromises your network, they can only compromise 1 backup. They can't there'll always be at least 1 backup which is uncompromised. Now, some people will be thinking, John, but some network attacks, they get in there like 100 days beforehand, and that's more than enough time to compromise every backup. And that's true. But to be honest, the people who are doing that aren't normally like criminals out to make money, because that's slow and ineffective. That's like either top-notch national spies or kids who are doing it for a different reason. So it doesn't entirely rule out the fact that they're going to implant some time-based malware, which will destroy your network in 3 months' time. I'm just saying it's really quite rare.
Well, that's lovely. Thanks, John. And that's all the time we've got questions for. Thank you. We will pop the contact email address into the chat, and at the end of the slides, there are also the contact details for John's team and some useful links. I'm going to hand over now to Tanya and Gavin. So thank you very much, John, and hand over now to Tanya and Gavin to deliver a sector update. Thank you. Gavin, Tanya.
Cheers, Pam. And John, absolutely brilliant presentation. And I think we're going to be sharing the slides more generally. I certainly learned a lot today, a really important topic, and great that we had so many people listening to that. Gavin and I are going to do a little bit of a double act. We haven't got very long, and I'm sure there'll be a number of questions, so please do make use of the chat. I've just posted in the chat some guidance on the new energy bill relief scheme, which was published yesterday. I'm sure many of you have already had a look at this and seen it. If not, it's there for you to have a quick look at. Now, we're not saying that this is going to solve all of your problems. Gavin and I and wider government absolutely get that there are significant pressures on your time, your leadership capacity. There are challenges on inflation, staff pay, and energy is one of those factors that you need to have sight of and have a think about in terms of getting the best value. Now, the government has provided this scheme because it's recognising that there is a particular challenge on energy at the moment. What I'll be doing in a moment is perhaps highlighting some of the key issues from that scheme for you. But before I do that, I might just pass over to Gavin, but because it's, as I said at the beginning, it's not just about energy, it's about the wider environment we find ourselves in, which is absolutely challenging in an unprecedented way. So the ESFA are positioning themselves to try and help you and support you as much as we're able. So Gavin, do you just want to sort of quickly go through the kinds of support we may offer?
Yeah, absolutely, Tanya. And I think, I mean, that, you know, that message there is I think entirely right, that what we're hearing from Academy Trust, and obviously we're involved in Academy Trust based from work, and we're seeing it on the ground as well, is that, you know, it's not just energy at the moment. Energy is obviously the really significant and worrying you know, pressure, and obviously the one which is rightly getting quite a lot of attention at the moment. But we've heard a lot about obviously the above expected increase in teacher pay awards, which obviously came very shortly before the deadline on budget forecast returns. So a lot of trusts are naturally worried about, you know, actually this could have a serious implication for my budget forecast coming forward. I mean, I think the real message that we want to get across from the agency is, you might be sitting there thinking, you know, my reserves, I still have reserves. I can't be in a position where I'm exhausting those reserves paying for energy, paying for these costs. You know, that's not what I've put them aside for. We may well have taken on a very challenging school. We need to use that money to support that school. We need to use that money to improve the learning environment, capital projects, that kind of thing. So actually, what's your message to me? Is it just kind of, I want you to kind of, you know, burn through your reserves? And the answer to that is categorically no. So if you're sitting there thinking, we do have reserves, we can perhaps cope, but actually we really appreciate some support. We'd appreciate a conversation with somebody to find out about how you can support us and what support might be available. Please do get in touch with us. The other point I kind of want to make on this, and just to sort of, I think, level with people on the call, I appreciate there might be a little bit of hesitance coming to CSFA. Again, I can say that having seen it again, as many of my colleagues do from both sides. People are naturally worried. You know, what happens if I kind of, send a message to the ESFA? Am I going to, is there going to be kind of, punitive action? Am I going to end up being smacked with a, with a notice to improve, or all these kinds of things? I mean, again, I think the answer to that is no. I mean, if trusts are struggling and want to have a conversation with us, we're not going to kind of launch some kind of punitive action. There are a very small number of cases, and if you have a look at the numbers of notices to improve, they're very, very small numbers of notices to improve that are issued, and they're not issued because trusts are struggling, are doing everything they can, and are struggling to meet their costs. So please get in touch for a supportive conversation. We're here. In terms of what the support could look like, you know, there is a range of support actually, and you know, we can look at kind of short-term support if we're envisaging kind of short-term you know, cash flow challenges, for example, and actually there's longer-term support as well, recognizing that some of the challenges schools are facing, you know, might be going into kind of multiple years. And as I say, I really want to kind of emphasize that point on reserves, because again, there's a lot in the media at the moment about you know, are the department expecting trusts simply to use up their reserves, you know, and is that our position? And again, it is absolutely not our position. We do fully recognise that trusts have those reserves for very valuable reasons, and so of course there'll be an element, sometimes trusts will have reserves put aside for this purpose, but we don't think it's an acceptable position to say, actually, if you have reserves, please use all of those reserves on this. We still would like you to get in touch with us if that's your situation. So I think that was kind of my main message, Tanya, really. I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to kind of add to that, but
yeah, just before I go on to some of the detail on the energy package, don't forget we have school resource management advisors. They are there to support you and they can come and help your leadership team and give you some options. It's about targeting your resources that you have at the moment in the places that make the biggest difference for your educational outcomes. And of course, there's all the other school resource management tools that we have on offer, which I've been through before, all on gov.uk. But if you need the link, pop that in the chat and we'll provide that. So thanks, Gavin, that's really great. And just to reiterate, if there are concerns, if your leadership have concerns, just drop us a line. We are here to help support you. If we don't know you're in trouble, we can't help. So you know where we are. In terms of the energy, I'm just aware, and I'll probably dash through this because we are running short of time. So the package is relevant to pretty much everyone in the non-domestic environment here. There's a few sort of quite small exceptions. They tend to be people who have an agreed fixed contract before the 1st of April 2022, and I can see someone in the chat is in that category. The rationale for that is a lot of the big increases happened post that date. So that's why there has been a date set there. And there's other categories which I don't think schools are going to fall into, which is around, you know, the business is there to use gas and electricity for the purpose of generating power for selling it back to the grid. So I don't think schools will be in that game. So I'm fairly confident schools and trusts are going to be eligible for this package. One of the questions we get quite a lot is, where does oil sit in this support? There is going to be an equivalent package for oil. There's going to be more detail on that shortly. So just rest assured there will be support available for what is not an insignificant number of schools who are still on oil, sometimes for good reasons, especially in rural areas. What the package has done is set a supported wholesale price. The level is set in the guidance, and that equates to less than half the wholesale price anticipated this winter. So that's a discounted price per unit on gas and electricity. Now, of course, the level of price reduction for each business is going to vary depending on whether you're on a fixed rate contract, or whether you're on a variable. So there isn't going to be one size fits all or a figure that's going to apply uniformly across all of the schools and trusts. The most important point, if you take anything away from this section of the Power Hour, is you do not need to do anything. We already are aware of scams, the emails being sent to you saying if you want to take advantage of the discounted offer, you need to sign up, give your bank details. Referring back to the cybersecurity session we've just had, you do not respond to those. You don't need to do anything. Your suppliers will do everything for you. Now, what the suppliers have asked us, they're obviously under quite a bit of pressure at the moment. They're processing all that information. No doubt you'll want to understand what's happening. They have asked us to pass on, if you want to contact them, that's absolutely fine. Maybe sort of try not to use the telephone for the next couple of days or so, just to give them a little bit of space. So use other routes such as email and their web chat. But of course, they're there and they will provide the information for you. Also, one common question we've had is around third-party intermediaries and energy brokers. They've got no influence over the per unit cost reductions that would be applied under the scheme. So again, you don't need to do anything. You don't need to take out a new contract or change your contract for these appropriate reductions to automatically be applied to their bills. So if you get an email in that space, it's possible it might be a scam, so do be careful. The whole package is going to be relevant, it is going to last for 6 months. There is a review set in the guidance at 3 months. We are with a commitment to look at how we can support the most vulnerable parts of the sector beyond the 6 months milestone. Now, there will be further detail on what that review will look like and how you as stakeholders, key stakeholders, will be able to engage in that. So we'll alert you to that guidance as soon as we have a bit more information. So that's the sort of key points I wanted to make today on the energy package. Just to reiterate again about the scams that are coming through, do be careful. And also, most importantly, if you need some support, we are here to help, as Gavin says. You know, we've got a huge array of support tools we can offer you through school resource management. We have our school resource management advisors, but having a conversation with our territorial case officers as well can be really important just to help get you through what is quite a challenging time for us all at the moment. So thank you very much for everything you're doing. Really appreciate your time today. I hope you have found it very useful. Pam, I don't know if you want to go through some of the questions in the chat. I think we've answered some of them.
Absolutely, Tanya. Yeah, just a few. It's the support staff pay award that's having the biggest impact for us. Anything that we can say, any more information we can give on support staff pay, if not funded?
So I've been reading through the chat as well, and I can see this is coming through really strongly. And I mean, I should just say first of all, you know, absolutely. I know I didn't specifically mention the support staff pay award, but yeah, I mean that, you know, that is just another one of the cost challenges trusts are facing at the moment. So I don't have an update on that to give you today, but what we can do is take that away to the policy team who are kind of working on that, and make sure that we do get you an update and potentially have more of a substantive conversation on this at the next Power Hour. But I think my point would be, you know, from the agency's perspective, I do appreciate that we're kind of looking at the trust's overall position, and so my message is kind of, you know, if you're worried about that, you know, get in touch regardless almost of where those cost pressures are coming from, and recognizing they're probably coming from many sides. But you know, in the meantime, you know, do get in touch with us, as I say, regardless of what that cost pressure is. In the meantime, on those specific policy questions about how the ward is funded, and if it's funded, we can certainly take that away and get a response for colleagues.
Lovely, thank you, Gavin. Thank you. Next question. Many schools are literally going to run out of cash if the awards are not fully funded, especially with the combined impact of massive energy price hikes.
Well, I think, to be honest, that's pretty much what Gavin and I have been saying. You know, the energy package that's been announced yesterday will go so far, and obviously give support. Do come to us, use the tools that you've got available, and come and talk to the ESFA through the usual routes, and we'll do what we can to support you. And we will have to get back to you on the other aspects of support. But the government is listening, and one of the things we do from these power hours, we really welcome your feedback, your challenge, and we do take those away and discuss wider across the department as well. So thank you very much for taking the time to do that.
That's lovely. Yeah, thank you all. And yeah, if you've contributed to the poll you'll see on the screen, we really appreciate this feedback. As I said at the start, it does help us to shape these sessions in view and meet your needs. I don't know if there's any more questions in the chat that we've not covered.
There was just one actually, which is an interesting one. Thank you, Michael Gidley, for biomass pellets. I don't know if there's anyone in the chat who can answer that now, because I'm sure there must be more than a couple of schools in that category. If not, we'll take that away and clarify.
There's one here. We are on the CCS frameworks for our energy. Will there be information sent out regards to the potential impacts of the energy support bill? Was on a call yesterday that says it's not simple at all to calculate what the real additional costs are going to be.
Joe, you've magically come on camera. Does that mean you've got a magic answer for us?
I've got an answer about biomass, which is that the statement that you gave earlier, Tanya, about oil also includes other fuels. So there are schools that are using biomass, liquid petroleum gas, coal, anthracite, all sorts of things. They're all within this other category where we're still conducting some work at the moment to try to work out what the equivalent scheme will be for other fuels.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you. Did we have anyone who's able to help out with the CCS frameworks energy question? Let's have a look.
Yeah, Dan.
Presumably it's still guidance that's to be that's to come out.
Yeah, I mean, I can kind of answer that without answering that.
Thank you.
So it's Dan from the procurement team. I don't think you can see me if my camera's working, but so no is the answer. But I imagine CCS will be issuing something. I do know that CCS's basket performance compared to the market prices is the price you're paying on that should be lower than the cap already. But we'll kind of liaise with CCS and see what update they can provide.
Super, thanks very much, Dan. Having trouble with the mute button. Thank you, Dan, that's really helpful. Someone else is asking for some guidance. There's links to all of the guidance at the end of the slides. Lots of helpful links. So I think we've probably covered them all and just about run out of time now. So thank you so much to all the presenters and to the delegates for attending today's session. And just to let you know what's coming next, next month on the 20th of October, we have a networking event. So lots of opportunity to chat to your peers and share good practice. So thank you very much and look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.
Bye now.